Swedish tanks are often overlooked, but they can be absolute beasts. Today we'll show you the hidden gems that send enemies running, so don't miss out on this video. Now we all know about the kranvagn and the STRV 103B, the tier 10s, and I'm sure you know how powerful they can be in the right hands, but very few people realise how powerful some of the lower tier vehicles and the tier 8s and the tier 9s can be within the game as well, and that's exactly what we're showcasing here, starting off with the Lansen C. And this vehicle is one that is capable of not only relocating with the mobility, having excellent gun handling to a degree, and also being able to outspot opponents, as well as just seeing the bushes used here to be able to get into a nice position in the early game on steps. Now, unlike the other tier 8 mediums, things like the Centurion, this tank is actually relatively small, and although you might not think that this tank is capable of really being able to bounce any rounds because of the really well angled upper hull armor, if people auto aim you at a angle as you're coming around a corner, you can bounce the odd occasional round, and as well as the fact that they do have to hit you, and when you're travelling at the speed that this vehicle can get up to, you can still have some brilliant results, and often they'll be thinking, how can I really deal with this tank? And with the gun depression that this tank has as well, it makes it even more difficult for them to do that, and you're going to be able to farm up opponents. And you can see here, they literally cannot deal with the Lansen C in this position. There is no way that they're able to spot them using the bush mechanics to be able to pull back, and using that expertly in today's game, as well as going for tracking damage as well, because that will boost up the overall damage you're dealing and be able to get you to the unicum levels much faster. And it's one of the many tools in the arsenal of one of the best players in the game. And you're seeing how this tank can actually pick apart the opponents. It's up to 3,500 damage with 1,200 assist in a tier 9 game as well, so it's not like you're coming up against tier 6s or tier 7s within the game. This is genuinely a very okay matchup. I mean, it's nothing exceptional, but in this sort of matchup it's actually kind of nice because you have the ability to farm up a ton of damage, and in fact tier 9 games in this tank are probably what you want to be able to maximize the damage that you can deal. People often underestimate the ability for tanks like this to actually get into a position that you're seeing here, and the enemy team have done absolutely nothing in order to try and remove it. It is just genuinely a farm fest at this point, and with the decent APCR rounds that this tank gets with 242 penetration, it isn't a tier 8 tank destroyer like the Scorpion G, but it's more than enough to deal with a lot of the tier 9 and tier 8 vehicles you will come up against, and so it's quite easy for him to farm up the damage within this game. And it's games like this that really change how you can think about some of these Swedish tanks. A lot of people typically know about, like we say, the STRV 103B, but vehicles down at tier 8 from the Swedish tech tree are genuinely really good. I mean, you're looking at the STRV S1, you've got the Lansen C, you've got the udes 14 Alt 4, and you just have a ton of other vehicles in the lower tiers as well, even further down at tier 6 like the STRV 74, and we'll take a look at those shortly as we finish up this game. If you enjoy watching tanks like this and videos like this, then make sure to subscribe, and also make sure that if you haven't already and you have enjoyed the video, make sure to like it. But more importantly, the game is coming to a close. Now, it's not completely over, and having done 6,900 damage in a tier 8 medium tank that is not particularly deemed as a overpowered vehicle, wrongly so, but yeah, you're seeing very good marksmanship here and very good map awareness to know where the enemy team are. Of course, they've taken the eastern side of the map on steps. It's typical that one side of the game is taken by one team, the other side taken by the other team, and at this point you've got to get yourself into a nice position like here, and this is actually a decent one to be able to counteract opponents from being able to poke in this position here on the enemy team. So if you can get here in your own games, whether it's in a Swedish medium like this, you'll definitely be rewarded, but it's getting here that is the problem, and often you want to be coming around this area here to come up from behind, and that way you'll be able to avoid people shooting you as you approach, or at least redeem or reduce how many people are going to be able to hit you at that point. Instead of course focusing on heavy tanks that are hulled down, what's the best way of dealing with it? Well, it's of course moving, and the tank is more than capable of doing that, and in doing so you're going to be able to find the side of vehicles, come from behind, and this tank is perfect at doing it. It is very, very flexible, and with the gun depression as well being relatively good too, you're able to be very competitive in the later stages of games. And often if you can preserve the hit points in a vehicle like this, you're going to be able to come away with much better results, as you're finding heavy tanks in the open with their sides just hanging out ready for you to pen them, and of course things like this AMX really having trouble to deal with the enemy team. And it's looking like the game is pretty much over, as he's coming around once again from behind, deciding there's no point in trying to get some shots riskily into some of those vehicles, so why not go and help the Type 4 heavy on his team against opponents that are not looking. So he shuts down the T103, perfect plays here, and he's going now for the Cobra. Hopefully Type 4 shuts him down, no point in going for him. Super Pershing's now making his approach, so why not find the back of him, somehow reversing backwards to try and deal with him. No idea what was happening there, but it's now time to get the last remaining damage in this game, picking over 8,400 damage and 2,000 assisted, with a total combined of 10,400. Yeah, a brilliant result, and definitely a tank that everybody should at least know about, or if you can, pick it up, although it is a premium. And if premium tanks aren't quite your thing, you can always pick the tech tree version of the Lansen C. Pretty much they are very, very similar in how they play. This version, the udes 14 Alt 5, is probably actually a better version, and it provides so much flexibility because of the fact that it does indeed get the siege mode mechanics, or at least the hydropneumatic suspension, so you can use that to your advantage to get 12 degrees of gun depression, and of course makes it very difficult for your opponents to really be able to trade with you on hills. And yeah, you can find some really novel, unique positions that a lot of tanks can't use, much like you can do with the tier 10 udes 1516. So what do you do with this vehicle, and how can you make it work in game? Well, it's very similar to, of course, the Lansen C. This thing gets 360 alpha and is capable of ripping apart a lot of the opponents you're going to be facing, as well as being able to get up to a top speed of 61 kilometers an hour when you are using Bond Turbo, and of course using ventilation to reduce the dispersion as well as improved aiming. And you may want to use that in your own tanks if you do decide to go towards this vehicle, or maybe you're revisiting it not knowing that this tank is actually as good as it is. Now, it's quite possible that you may want to run coated optics with this vehicle to increase that view range and have the spotting potential, but it really depends on your playstyle. And even if you just run it with ventilation, you're able to get 404 meters, which is more than capable of probably spotting most things at tier 8. It is not the optimal, but it will definitely be able to grant you what you need. And yeah, it's a fantastic amount to be able to really deal with some of these opponents. Now the KV2 here, not knowing that there is a tank that's going to be poking him, he's able to get some free shots, and this is the perfect situation when you've got a tank that maybe doesn't have the best damage per minute in the game. It's only got about 2,000 within it. Of course you can use rammer if you so are inclined, but 2,000 is okay, and you are able to have that higher alpha than some of the other vehicles at this tier, meaning that yeah, you can outtrade a lot of the other mediums, which can be something that is very powerful within your games to increase your damage to the next level. And how you've seen both the Lansen and of course this vehicle be able to trade with some heavy tanks, as well as of course some of the mediums. And I mean lower tier vehicles like a Fury are going to be furious. Sorry, that's just awful, but they are going to be furious when they come up against this thing, because there's no way that they can really outtrade you, because they're going to have to land multiple shots. And if you side scrape with this vehicle, not particularly the best idea, but it slims down the shot. You're not going to be bouncing much with the side, but it definitely makes it harder for your opponents to hit, which is the imperative thing. The one tank you probably don't want to see when playing in a udes is an OI. Of course, this tank in the rear of the vehicle has absolutely no armor, but don't worry, because he somehow hits the gun. Yeah, Bit of a lucky one, but nonetheless able to now farm up this OI. He's going to be feeling a little bit worse for wear after this tank gets to him. And of course the OI, probably in the case of reloading, and of course manages to low roll the OI, meaning that he is now not in the best position. It's a bit precarious. There's an IS-2, there's an OI, and if they both work together, which apparently they don't want to do, which is perfect for this game, he could have quite easily been in a very, very dire situation. But the IS-2, of course, staying in the same position, holding an angle on the Chrysler K, not quite sure why, but of course lets his teammates be hit whilst not actually doing much against this vehicle. But IS-2 still sat in this position and of course getting just a tad lucky, setting him on fire. And he burns for 583 damage. That's definitely feels bad, and he now makes a flanking maneuver, uses the speed of the vehicle to outflank obviously, and manages to find the backside of the IS-2, who is definitely looking the wrong way. Now with the T-34-100 the game is basically over, but a brilliant 6,573 damage done so far, and the game is all done. Yeah, a brilliant tank, but let's jump into something a little different. And so what exactly is this next vehicle, the different one? Well, it is of course the STRV S1, the tier 8 better version than the tech tree, because of course it's a premium and has slightly better armor, and that is pretty much it. But what it does have is 2,900 damage per minute. It has 0.28 accuracy when you're using it in the siege mode, and you really are able to extend view range when you do use binoculars on these tanks, because of course you're going to be primarily stationary in the vehicles to be able to fire, or using the siege mode anyway, so you're not going to be moving around a whole lot. But what's lovely about these vehicles is the ability to snapshot. The Progetto's finding exactly that out, and this is lovely in a udes or any of the Swedish tank destroyers. It's just the perfect scenario, because most tanks in the game aren't going to be able to do what you're seeing here, where you're able to snipe those cupolas, but the accuracy, it just feels so good. We're not using the true reticle size in today's replay, and I guess that with the true reticle size it's going to be disgusting, but the BZ-176 here, obviously a tank that is probably your worst nightmare when you are playing in these sorts of tanks, because it can overmatch you, and yeah, it's got a big old gun, and so you don't want to be getting caught out a whole lot by those vehicles. But how are we going to see this tank do something spectacular? Because at the end of the day, with 2,000 damage in a Swedish tank destroyer, when it looks like the game is starting to wrap up to a close and your team are ending up getting absolutely farmed, how is it going to be a good game? Because although you may have view range of 450 meters when you're using binocs and you actually have them active, you're not going to be able to use that too much. Surely they're going to be able to farm you out, and yeah, you'd be wrong. Now unfortunately for the BZ, he's made the key mistake of getting spotted out in the open, and this tank rips apart opponents so easily, and from the base there is possibilities of getting side shots. Now yes, if you're in a tank destroyer, but I see so many of the heavy tanks and mediums playing in these positions, which are pretty much terrible, because of the fact that if you get spotted here you are getting removed very quickly. But the game in this stance actually is one of the best opportunities for the STRV to be in the position that he's in, and in fact he's now moving back to get into some of the bushes to provide unbelievable amounts of camo and spot the opponents. Now I'm not going to lie, even with 2,900 damage per minute at the maximum in this vehicle, this is not fun, because the enemy team have nearly triple the hit points of your team, and you're going to have to keep that gun firing for a long time consistently, and of course not take any hits in return. But when you are playing in a game where you're coming up against tigers who definitely can't just auto pen you if they auto aim you, and at distance where they're not probably able to consistently deal damage, it's probably not going to go all too well. Now he's trying to blind fire the Progetto 46 here, obviously a very dangerous tank if it's left alive, so if he can remove him or help out his teammate, then it's going to be beneficial to him in the later stages of the game. His teammate is surrounded by about 1 million other tanks, so yeah, it's probably not going to be long before he gets taken out and they'll all be coming for him. And it looks like the T-26E5 or the Patriot just had a very bad day. The Projecto 46, the T-43, the Tiger 1, the VK-1001P, the VK-3002D and the other Tiger 1 all still left alive. But what they fail to remember is that you don't push a camo vehicle such as this without taking a ton of rounds, and you certainly don't outspot them very easily, if ever, even if you're in a light tank, which unfortunately for the enemy team they don't have, just a ton of mediums and of course the 2 Tigers with that tank destroyer that is left remaining, and he hasn't been spotted for the entire game. So what happens now? The VKD decides he's coming out, but because the STRV is actually double bushing here, is able to not only hit these opponents but not get spotted for it. And of course the majority of the enemy team are out in the open, but can he win this 1 versus 6 in the game? Well, I guess we'll have to find out and showcase why this tank is a little bit sus within the game, and why you should never just feel like this tank is going to be an easy win. Because if you're in a game like this and you're pushing into it and you're not doing it all at once, yeah, this thing is rather disgusting. Now the enemy team doing the right thing, blind firing the bush. It's a typical spot that people will get into, but unfortunately there are a ton of bushes, and you could see he was lining up through the shots of these 2 bushes to avoid getting detected, and he pulls back behind another one to enable himself to use the optimal bush setups. And actually a tank like this is quite good for learning how to play and use bush mechanics in the game that a lot of other tanks don't really require you to do, even though you probably should if you can. And with this tank, if you don't do it, you can often get spotted, and of course with these vehicles they don't do very well when they're spotted, hence the design in order to say undetected. Now the best thing about these vehicles, unlike some of the other vehicles, is that if you do turn your hull armor without actually moving forward or going backwards or just moving, you'll be able to keep your binoculars active, which is something that no other tanks in the game, or other than of course the Swedish tank destroyers, are able to do, and that allows you to outspot a ton of opponents. But unfortunately he does actually get spotted, but unfortunately for the enemy T-43, he did not have fun getting set on fire for full health. Lovely work. But the Hellcat, the little seal clubbing vehicle down at tier 6 from the American line, gets spotted next, and he's removed too. But unfortunately the Projecto 46 actually able to land a few rounds there, along with the Tiger, which is not fun at all. And yeah, now it's time to try and remove the Tiger. But what you'll be noticing here is that he's only 100 meters away, and he's only able to actually detect the STRV once he's fired. Now he's having to do some quick swiveling to be able to bounce those projectile rounds along with any of the other vehicles left alive. But the VK-1001P, that big tier 8 German heavy tank, still left alive, but it's been a fantastic round of world of tanks so far, and he actually has managed to get 1 blind fire too. But can he finish off the VK without him spotting him? Here is the real question, because if he gets spotted here it could be curtains. But the VKP, obviously not a tank that is going to have a decent amount of view range for the most part. And does he spot him though? Will the Projecto be able to do it? No, he doesn't. And the Projecto is now in a very tense situation along with the STRV, since he's a one-shot for this Italian medium tank, and not just any medium tank, a auto-reloading medium tank that's capable of not only hitting you once but 3 times, that are potentially going to remove you from the game. And of course he is not a one-shot with 452 hit points left, so you're going to have to hit him twice without taking any hits. And of course, how do you do that? Well, you use what the Swedish tank destroyers are best at, and especially this tier 8, little bit of a broken one, to be able to outspot the opponents. Now he's sitting waiting for the Projecto to make the move, and unfortunately he does, and unfortunately for him, he gets removed very easily. And what a result in this STRV S1, and hopefully you've enjoyed the video looking at 3 amazing tanks that most people just disregard down at tier 8 and don't really think a whole lot about, but hopefully you did. And if you did enjoy this video and you want to see more vehicles that are slightly underrated, not the overpowered tier 10s that we always see on YouTube, then make sure you subscribe and of course like the video and let me know what tech tree you want to see me do next.